Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We will first, in the first session, we will study the Quran. I have picked for today's reading verses 30 of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter, 30 onwards, 30. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the evil whisperings of Satan, the rejected one. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of the God, whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ. And recall the time when your Lord said to the angels, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. I have decided to send to the world, to the earth, a Khalifa, an independent being who is going to rule over the world that is going to be given to it for living. Qalu, they responded, that is, the angels responded, Ataj'alu fiha, are you going to create therein man yufsidu fiha, those who are going to create mischief in it, wa yasfiku dima, and they are going to shed the blood of each other, wa nahnu nusabbihu bihamdika, whereas we praise you and exalt your name, wa nuqaddisu lak, and we declare your purity. Qala inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. He said, I know what you don't know. Before creating man, the Almighty announced His plan before the angels. It seems from a later description that amongst the assembly of angels, there were jinns as well. The Almighty announced that He is going to create a Khalifa. By Khalifa, what was meant was a creature that is going to get authority, that is going to be able to implement its own plans, will have independence, will be able to choose whatever is within the understanding of the individual, that is, will not be forced from the outside. When this plan was announced before the angels and the jinns, the angels, about whom we normally imagine that they are the most obedient of the servants of the Almighty, they, instead of saying that we have got it, Samaina wa atana, we hear and we obey, they asked this question, which if you look at it, it seems to be a kind of criticism on the idea. They said, are you going to create therein those who are going to create mischief in it and will shed the blood of each other? Why did the angels apprehend that the decision of the Almighty is going to lead to chaos and disorder getting created in the world? The answer is that the plan that the Almighty mentioned included an implied understanding, or who knows, maybe it was announced in the detail. What we have been given to read is only a very brief mention of it. But it did very clearly specify that the creatures, the humans, are going to be independent. They will be able to exercise their own judgment, and they will do whatever they would choose to. Quite obviously, the angels thought that this decision, if it's going to be implemented, would mean that these creatures, humans, are going to misuse their liberty, their freedom. And this is what they put forth before the Almighty. In response, the Almighty said, قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I know what you don't know. So the angels had their own reservations. They expressed them freely. They mentioned that we don't understand why this plan is getting implemented, while we are here praising you, worshipping you, and doing whatever you want us to do. The Almighty did not respond by reacting angrily, did not admonish them, but just mentioned that I know what you don't know. Now, this response of the angels and the Almighty's response to what they said, quite clearly is giving us an understanding that using one's intellect, asking questions, even sometimes critically examining what is being presented to us in religion, is not undesirable, is not something that has been prohibited. Had that been the case, the angels wouldn't have raised these questions, and the Almighty wouldn't have mentioned the incident in the Quran. So, for one thing, let's be clear about the fact that using our intellect, asking questions so as to understand why something has been mentioned or why a certain expectation has been required is not undesirable at all. In fact, it seems that it's desirable. It's only then that you can justify as to why the Almighty chose to mention this incident in His book. The Almighty has responded by doing what is mentioned in the next verse. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And He taught Adam names, all of them. ثُمَّ عَرَضَهُمْ عَلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ. And then He presented them before the angels. Presented whom? Those whose names were taught to Adam. God taught Adam names, and Adam presented those whose names were taught to him. Now, the pronoun that has been used for those who were presented is a pronoun in Arabic which can only be used for intelligent beings, angels, jinns, or humans. This pronoun cannot be used for mountains, stars, heavenly bodies, clouds, etc. So, what God Almighty taught to Adam were names of humans. And what Adam did was that he presented those people whose names were taught to him. Now, by names, it sometimes also includes and implies the details of the individual or the entity that is being introduced. So it seems that God first taught Adam about his progeny, some of the prominent names, the outstanding performers, the prophets, and some other great men who in the future were to do acts of piety despite difficulties, who were to fight for the cause of truth. فَقَالَ أَنْبِئُونِي بِأَسْمَاءِ هَؤُلَاءِ. After presenting those people whose names were taught to Adam, God asked the angels, tell me the names of these, in kuntum sadiqeen, if you are truthful. If you are truthful in your complaint that this new creature, humans, are going to cause mischief on earth, then okay, then it really means that you know quite a bit about them. So let me know who these people are and let me know what they're going to do. قَالُوا سُبْحَانَكَ لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا إِلَّا مَا عَلَّمْتَنَا. Obviously the angels were not prepared for this question. They didn't know the details of these humans that were presented to them before them by Adam. What were the details of it, we don't know. Obviously, we can't even imagine. And we've been asked not to kind of imagine about these things which are beyond the possible limits of our comprehension. But obviously, the gist of it is that the angels responded by acknowledging, Subhanaka la ilma lana, you are free from all errors, O God. La ilma lana, we have got no knowledge, illa ma allamtana, except for what you have taught us. Innaka antal alimul hakim, indeed you are all knowing, all wise. You know everything and you are wise. You cannot do anything wrong. Every decision of yours is based on wisdom. Qala ya Adam, God then said, O Adam, ambihum bi asma'ihim, inform them about their names. That is, inform these people whom you are introducing to the angels, about whom I have already taught you. You present them before the angels. Ambihum bi asma'ihim. You inform them about their names, about their achievements, about the kind of humans they are going to be. Innaka antal alim bi asma'ihim. Falamma anba'ahum bi asma'ihim. And then when he informed them about their names, and as I said, about their attributes, their features, their achievements, Qala alam aqul lakum, he said, God said, did I not tell you, Inni alamu ghaibas samawati wal ard, that I know the hidden, what is hidden in the heavens and the earth, wa alamu ma tubduna wa ma kuntum taktumun, and I also know what you do openly and what you were concealing. That is, after the names were introduced and the features of those humans whose names were given, they were presented before them, the angels admitted that now we've got it. And we know that our knowledge is very limited. We only know what, oh God, you teach us. We have no knowledge beyond that, and that you are all knowing, all wise, your decisions cannot go wrong. And the Almighty said that's indeed true. I know everything, whatever you do in the open, and I also know what you have been hiding, concealing. That is, I know that hidden behind your apparent question, your apparent complaint, disagreement, or whatever that you made when I announced the decision to create man, hidden behind that question was your concern that why is it that you are creating man while we are there? So God knew about it as well. Now obviously the all-important question is as to what exactly were those names that were introduced to Adam, to the angels. First introduced to Adam, and then they were introduced to the angels. And when they were introduced, the angels got the point. Obviously, it would be incorrect to assume that the angels just came to learn about something which they could not properly grasp, and they conceded because God didn't want them to continue to debate anymore. Well, if that would have been the case, they wouldn't have raised the question in the first place. So, what seems to be the case, the most probable reality about this explanation is that the Almighty responded to the angel's question by saying, now what I'm saying is a paraphrased version of what the Almighty said and required to be done. I'm just giving a simple understanding that I have in mind to explain these verses. What the Almighty said to the angels was that, look here, your objection is not completely incorrect. You're not absolutely wrong. But you have looked at only one side of the picture. When you were informed that I am going to create another being which is going to have independence, freedom, you were led to think that that freedom is going to be misused. You were not entirely wrong. However, the point that you missed was that the same freedom is also going to be properly, positively used by some others. And it was those others, some of those prominent humans, whose names, whose attributes were introduced to the angels, and then the angels, when they got the point, they said, okay, now we know the whole truth, and therefore we now understand the entire scheme, and we know that God knows everything, and He is absolutely wise. He cannot do anything which is other than what is wise. In other words, God informed them that you have looked at only one side of the picture. You have looked at only one possibility, which is that the being that we're going to create is going to misuse its freedom. You did not look at the other possibility, that the same humans, some of them, are going to use their freedom for goodness, for piety, for truth, for righteousness. And that is precisely why I am making man. I am making humans, by giving them freedom and the opportunity to choose the right from the wrong, and informing them about what is right and what is wrong, and making wrong tempting, and making what is true trying. And I put them in the trial of this life to find out as to who amongst them are going to choose righteousness, piety, and truth to follow, despite it being at times difficult, and who are the ones who are going to misuse their freedom because of its temptations. I am doing it so that by requiring them to go through this test, I choose and pick those people who will be eligible, who will succeed and prove their eligibility to enter the paradise. That's what the purpose of my decision is. And obviously, when the whole picture was presented to them, the angels acknowledged that we couldn't see through it, and therefore we now know that what you've said is absolutely right. So there are briefly a few conclusions. Asking questions is never wrong. In order for us to feel comfortable and confident and be inclined and motivated to do something, we need to know what the truth is. However, if you have a few objections, that doesn't really mean that because of those objections, you should move away from what is being presented to you. And one more thing, the Almighty has created this world so as for it to be a trial. It's a trial primarily because of the freedom that we have, and this freedom is either being misused or is being properly used, and the decision as to who is going to succeed and who is going to fail will all depend upon as to how we use our freedom. That finishes the first part of my presentation. The second part has got to do with the understanding of Islam. And in the last two presentations, I presented the answer to this question in the first of my two presentations as to what is Deen, where does it come from, what are its sources, what are its contents, and what is the ultimate purpose. So I mentioned that Deen comes from the messengers. The Deen is comprised of Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah, And the ultimate purpose is tazkiyah, purification, leading to the paradise. In the second lecture, in our last meeting, I presented certain salient features of this deen, Islam, the message of God. I mentioned the fact that this message has been completed. In other words, whatever God wanted to deliver to us in the category of religion has now been completely delivered. This message is meant for the entire humankind. It's not for one particular nation, it's for everybody. This message has been fully preserved because no new prophet is going to come. This message is the last message. No new messenger is going to come, and therefore it has been fully preserved. Its preservation has been ensured by enabling the message to satisfy two conditions, two criteria: ijma, consensus, complete agreement, and tawatur, uninterrupted continuity. These conditions, these criteria are fully satisfied in the source, which is a text called Quran, and the source which is comprised of religious practices called Sunnah. Both satisfy the conditions of ijma, complete agreement, and tawatur, uninterrupted continuity. There is a third source too, which is hadith, which is a very natural source. It's information transmitted by individuals, unlike in the case of Quran and Sunnah, which was transmitted by the entire first generation of Muslims to the entire second generation of Muslims. This source, hadith, was pieces of information transmitted by one individual in the first generation to one individual or a few individuals in the second generation. Information which they chose to transmit. Some people transmitted some other companions transmitted some other information. Many of them didn't choose to transmit anything, or even if they did, it did not get the opportunity of moving further in the ladder of generations. This source, third source, hadith, is a footnote explanation, clarification of the Quran and Sunnah, and should be read strictly in the light of the Quran and Sunnah. Now I will tell you today briefly that Muslims quite often refer to some other sources as well, which I am mentioning as the alleged sources, the other sources of learning. There are quite a few of them, but I have mentioned only four. Imams, Ijma, Ijtihad, and Qiyas. Now what are these? I'll just briefly mention them. Imam is a term which is used in a particular sense by one group of Muslims, which we normally describe as Shias. Muslims have been divided into two sects right from the first century Hijrah. Those who are Sunnis and those who are Shias. Roughly 20% of the Muslim population of the world is comprised of Shias, 80% are Sunnis, plus and minus few percentage numbers. What distinguishes the Shia understanding of Islam from the Sunni understanding of Islam is the understanding of Imams. We live together. There are people who are born Shias, there are people who are born Sunnis. We know that there are differences. We must understand those differences. There is no need to condemn, criticize, accuse others of believing in things which are different. We know for a fact that most of us accept the version of Islam that we understood and received when we were growing as Muslims. Most people don't change their ways. But what must get done is that we should understand the other point of view. That's the first step. Now, the Shia understanding of Islam claims that after the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, the Almighty decided to have Imams who were given the authority to not only lead Muslims in religion, but also to lead them in worldly matters, politically. In other words, according to the Shia understanding, Muslims are expected to follow the Imams who have been appointed by the Almighty, whether it comes to political decisions or whether it comes to religious matters. And the Imams, according to the understanding, are from the progeny of Fatima and Ali radiyallahu anhuma. So they have, in the case of Ithna Ashari Imamis, that is Shias, 12 Imams, the 12th of which list disappeared and is going to reappear close to the Day of Judgment. Now, obviously, when we talk to each other about it, we try to understand the arguments that are presented. The arguments are many, and obviously, when it comes to the question of Islamic understanding, the first source that needs to be resorted to understand what a particular point of view is saying is the Quran. So, there are a few arguments from the Quran which the Shia Muslims present to support the cause of their belief, their understanding, that accepting and acknowledging the status of Imams as the primary source of Islamic knowledge is a fundamental part of Islamic teachings. They present verse 59 of Surah Nisa, Surah number 4, verse number 59. They say that the Quran says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, believers, atiullaha wa atiur Rasul, obey God, obey the messenger, wa ulil amri minkum, and those who are in authority amongst you. So, what they say is that quite clearly, the Almighty is requiring us not only to believe in God, not only to obey God and the messenger, but He is also requiring us to obey ulul amri minkum, which according to their understanding are the Imams. The Sunnis respond by saying that quite apart from the fact that we don't agree with you with the understanding of ulul amri minkum as Imams, the way you understand, if you move on to the next part of the verse, it says, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ, then if you have a dispute amongst you, فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ, then you refer that dispute to God and His Messenger. In other words, what Sunnis claim is that the verse is clearly suggesting that ulul amri minkum, whoever they are, can be disputed with. They are the people with whom Muslims can have disagreement, which is what goes against the understanding of Imams that the Shias are presenting. Now the Shias obviously have an answer to that, and the debate goes on. I am not trying to make a presentation wherein I will give you a final verdict. Quite honestly, there is no need ever to give final verdicts. Religious discussions are not matches of sports wherein you need to have one person winning, one team winning and the other losing. These discussions should be an occasion to learn, to understand, and we should leave the ultimate decision to the individual. They should be indulged in a polite, decent, and academic manner. So that's the first source, Imams. Quite apart from the Quran, the Sunnah, and Hadith, we have this source also, which some people refer to as an important religious source. The next source is Ijma. There are quite a few Muslims who say that if a religious understanding is agreed upon in a manner that there is Ijma on it, then that's it. The matter is decided. And by Ijma, what they mean is that all Muslim scholars agree to a certain position, agree to a certain understanding. If they agree upon a certain understanding, well, that agreement, because it is agreed upon by everybody, becomes an Islamically binding understanding. If it's a ruling, then it's a binding ruling. If it's an element of faith, it becomes a binding element of faith, and so on. Those who disagree with this understanding say that Ijma has never been possible. In actual fact, some of them say that there is no Ijma on the definition of Ijma. There is no agreement on the definition of Ijma. They quote sometimes some outstanding scholars of the earlier generations. They mention as prominent names as Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam ibn Taymiyyah, Imam ibn Hazm, Imam Razi. And they quote them by claiming that all these big names, they are reported to have mentioned that there has never ever been an ijma on any matter amongst Muslim scholars except in the case of the Quran and Sunnah. There is ijma on the Quran and there is ijma on Sunnah. They say that if somebody claims that other than these two sources, that they are from the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, if somebody claims that there is an ijma amongst Muslims, he is telling a lie. Imam Razi goes on to say that ijma is not possible. You see, what he says is that ijma could only have been possible had all scholars of the world assembled in one place to deliberate upon a certain issue, and then would have concluded all together that one conclusion is the ultimate final decision which we all agree upon. Imam Razi says it's not possible. Even if it, by some stroke of luck, it becomes a possibility, I will only accept if all of them raise their voices and say about a certain matter that we agree. While Imam Razi says that I probably still not agree, because I don't know how many amongst them in the crowd said yes and how many of them chose to stay mum. So in other words, even though there is a very strong claim that ijma is also a source of Islamic knowledge, the fact of the matter is that there is hardly any possibility of ijma in any matter of Islamic learning except for the Quran and Sunnah, which we all have gotten through ijma. All that we can say is that in some matters there seems to be a large number of scholars saying the same thing, agreeing to the same point. Well, if that's true, then obviously people should not ignore opinions supported by a large number of scholars, but that doesn't really mean that that opinion is, as a consequence of it being supported by a large number of scholars, has to necessarily be the right one. It has to be seen in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah for it to be either accepted or rejected. The other two sources are ijma, are ijtihad and qiyas. You see, the world that we are living in is a dynamic world. It's changing, it's progressing. There are new developments taking place for which there is no direct mention in the Quran, Sunnah and Hadith as to how they are going to be treated. Now, if we are confronted with a situation where there is a new development and there is no clear ruling regarding how that development needs to be treated in the light of Islam, then scholars will have to come up with some answers. Now, scholars will undertake an effort in order for them to find out as to whether the new development is acceptable or not. That effort is called ijtihad. Now, within ijtihad, that is, within the efforts undertaken to find out whether a certain development is in line with Islamic teachings or not, there could be a possibility that we may find a similar problem issue solved in Quran, Sunnah or Hadith. If that is the case, then the similarity of the two issues, two items, two problems, the one that has been dealt with in Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, and the one which is the recent development, a similarity is going to be drawn, which is what is called qiyas. That is, in qiyas, the scholar draws analogy from the Quran, Sunnah and Hadith for something that is new but similar to what's there already mentioned in the original sources of Islamic knowledge. A case in point, an example is the example of khamr, intoxicating drinks. Intoxicating drinks have been forbidden in the Quran, but we now know that there are many other intoxicants which are not necessarily drunk. Sometimes they are smoked, sometimes they are smelled, sometimes they are injected, sometimes they are chewed. So now when a ruling is given, that all those items, no matter how they are consumed, if they are causing an individual to get intoxicated, they too are haram, because the Quran has declared intoxicating drinks as haram. So by analogy, the two will first be related to each other and a conclusion will be drawn. Sometimes you do ijtihad, or you are required to do ijtihad, and you don't have any item, any mention in the Quran, Sunnah and Hadith with which to analogize. Then you have got to do ijtihad which will not be based on qiyas. It will be a non-qiyasi ijtihad. One example of it is the possibility of donating our body organs to another person, like kidney. Now there is no mention at all of even a near example of any such possibility in the Quran or Hadith. Now if that is going to be the issue, and we will try to find out what exactly is the correct attitude of Islam towards this development, this effort will be again ijtihad, but not based on qiyas. It's going to be, call it non-qiyasi ijtihad. What I have tried to mention today is that Quran, Sunnah are the original sources, and Hadith is a footnote source. But quite apart from these sources, there are some other claims that have been made about certain sources that they too are Islamically binding. I have mentioned 4 of them, tried to clarify briefly what they are and what their correct nature is. I mentioned imams, I mentioned ijma, I mentioned ijtihad and qiyas. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله. Now I am available for questions.
If some brother has a question, please feel free to ask from Dr. Khalid Zaheer. If you are reluctant to speak in English, even you can speak in Urdu as well. And I think Dr. Sir will not mind. He's very proficient in Urdu as well.
Well, much more than English.
Yes.
I have a question. So, Dr. Shah, we say that Deen was completed after Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Quran, Sunnah have been now transferred with Tawatur. So we are certain about their authenticity. But obviously we are also aware that over the period of time, the Quranic Arabic is quite different to the Arabic that is spoken now. So that's why we have religious scholars guiding us and people doing research to come to the right conclusions and understandings. My question is, what is the reason, if there is one, of not sending any more messengers? The obvious answer obviously is because the religion was completed, Quran was revealed, and then the Sharia and the Sunnah was completed and has been transferred through Tawatur. So we are fine with the authenticity. But for clarity, it would have been helpful, wouldn't it, if there were messengers during this time guiding us directly?
Well, you see, there could have been two possibilities. One possibility was that the Almighty would have sent messengers and they would have communicated God's message to the people in a manner that it would become absolutely clear to everyone. Well, at least to the people who wanted clarity. That didn't even happen while the prophets were physically present. The understanding of the message by its very nature is such that it's relative. If you are intelligent, if you have an understanding of the language, it's the way it's expressed, you are more likely to understand the message more clearly. If you are closer to the Prophet, you have the opportunity of talking to him directly, you stand a better chance. The messengers never come with the purpose that everybody comes to learn about God's message with equal clarity. They come with the purpose that the message should be available for everyone who wants to go to it for understanding, for finding out what the Almighty wants to say in different matters of importance. And as I said, even when the prophets are there, it's relative. Now, God chose to discontinue the process of prophets coming anymore. But prior to that, when prophets were coming, we again didn't have the same situation prevailing all throughout. We know, for example, that between Isa alayhi salam, Jesus Christ, and the Prophet, there was something like 600 years. We know that even while Musa and Harun alayhimus salam were physically present, there were people who disagreed. So the Almighty, when He chose to discontinue with the message, with the process of messengers, why did He do it? Well, it seems, now this is based on my speculative understanding, others could come up with other views, but the fact is that we know for sure that there is a declaration in the Quran that the process is discontinued. My understanding is that the last prophet, may God have mercy on him, he came at a time after which preserving the message and transmitting, delivering it to different parts of the world had become possible. Now, when that possibility arose, the Almighty decided that even though he's not going to send prophets anymore, he will instead ensure the preservation of it. So now, if people care to understand the message, it's available. It all depends on how much they are prepared to put in their efforts, and it all depends on how intelligent, less intelligent, how close to the times of the Prophet people are. And as I said, it's always going to vary. The understanding is going to vary. It is always going to be relative. The Almighty is always going to look at the circumstances of the individual in deciding as to how he or she is going to be graded. So the decision was taken primarily because of the developments that took place that enabled the message to be preserved and to be disseminated to all parts of the world. That's my understanding.
Yeah, Jazakallah. Dr. Sir, there are some very quick questions. I want just a brief answer from you. I'm not in the details because of short of time. You mentioned earlier about the first generation, time of first generation, time of second generation. What are exactly timeline if we go back to 14 years before? What do you mean by first generation, second generation Muslim?
The Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, when he delivered the message, he had his companions, most of who were young. And when he left this world, his companions were in their 50s, in their 40s, in their 30s, even younger. They were teenagers as well. So, depending upon what age group did the companions belong, they obviously, as is the nature of our existence in this world, we leave this world sooner or later. So there were people who died during the lifetime of the Prophet. When he left this world, this process continued. We know for sure, for example, in the case of the first 4 caliphs, that it took something like 2.5 years for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to leave, and then another 10 years for Umar, and then 12 years again for Usman, and 5-6 years more for Ali radiallahu anhum. The last of the companions who left was, let's say something like 80 years later. So the entire generation had gone and an entire new generation had arrived. So, one generation would take something like 50-60 years to disappear and to be replaced by a new one.
I see. There is another question about Imam, the concept of Imam between Sunni Muslim and the Shia Muslim. Like Shia Muslim, they are very strong and committed about their Imam, and they take their words as the words of God as general perception. As compared to, I think we have the Sunni Muslims have also more or similar type of this attitude about their Imam, and they even, call other bad names if somebody have a disagreement with their Imam, or they try to become divided into sects actually. Like in our Sunni mainstream, Deoban, Brezi, and many Wahhabi or Ahle Hadith, they are also very firm about their Imam. So how do you see, do they not consider Imam as a word of God like Shia they are doing as well?
It's very interesting that, in the two streams of Muslims, the Shia and the Sunnis, there has been a journey which is exactly in the opposite direction of each other. The Shias started with a very firm belief that their Imams are the only source of Islamic learning, and therefore no disagreements are possible. In the first 3 centuries of the Islamic calendar, those who were Imamis and Shias would just follow their Imams. But then the 12th Imam, when he disappeared, the Shias became more open and liberal by resorting to ijtihad because there was nobody for them to go to directly and to seek religious guidance. Now, exactly the opposite happened in the case of Sunnis. They started off with 2, 3, 4 generations of their academic life in an atmosphere wherein they were open, there were debates, there were disagreements, there were discussions. There was no one firm understanding that was considered to be binding on all. All these great names, which incidentally again are preceded by Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and many others, they were scholars. And because of their arguments and their great learning and their piety, they became popular. But none of them ever insisted that their point of view should be the only one that needs to be accepted. In actual fact, we know for sure that many of them were the ones who, during their lifetimes, they changed their opinions from what it was before. But then came a time in the history of Sunni Muslims, they started becoming more rigid regarding their Imams, who, by the way, were not the Imams like the Shia Imams, with the kind of connotation that they had. But now the attitude of Sunnis somehow has become more and more rigid and firm regarding the opinions of their respective Imams. That's the story. While the Sunnis need to be informed that what you are doing and your stance, your approach, was never ever required by the Imams whose names you are quoting and whose works you are presenting and pleading. This is something which is contrary to what they said. The mentions of Deobandi, Barelvi, etc. that you mentioned, these are recent developments, the last 2 or 3 centuries. But the earlier groups were the Imams of fiqh, followed by the Muhaddiseen. So it's a flow in opposite directions as far as the Shias and Sunnis are concerned.
Yeah, Jazakallah. My next question is regarding the verses which you explained very well in your presentation earlier. It's about the freedom to the man given by God. And that freedom has been explained or understood by many nations, whether they believe on God or not. Mostly are believers of God. And they said that God born them as a free, and they can identify that limit of this free, they will discover themselves. And once they discover themselves, they can conquer any field of the life. In sports, in relationships, in achievement of any of notions called success in the world. So that is the outcome of that freedom, which is mentioned in Quran. But is that true? My first question. And second, if it is true, why Muslims in general, they have not identified the spirit of this freedom and become a best nation in the world?
Well, let me start with the easier of the 2 questions to answer the second question. Well, Muslims have not been able to do it because they have not been able to properly understand their religion. And they have not been able to properly understand their religion for precisely the reason that you've mentioned, that they have chosen to blindly follow the opinions of their elders instead of reading the Quran with an open mind, pondering over its verses, reflecting upon its the message deeply. They have chosen to follow the easier way of just blindly following their elders, and therefore they have themselves imposed restrictions on their freedom. It's because they are not following the message of the Almighty properly. They have no influence whatsoever in the world that we are living in today. They are the weakest, the most insignificant people amongst the entire comity of nations, which is sad. It's not because they are Muslims, it is despite they are Muslims, they still have not been able to do what promise the message had for them, because they are not understanding the message properly and they are not following it. And that, as I said, is because of the fact that they refuse to critically understand the message and their opinions. Now, as far as the first question is concerned, you see, religion does not, God's message does not impose any unnecessary, unreasonable restrictions on mankind in the progress that He wants to make. However, religion has come for certain reasons, and those reasons are that there are certain questions in life which humans on their own cannot answer, and they need a higher source to answer those questions, which is God. The questions are: who created us? Why did He create us? How can we thank Him? What should we do when we are weak and vulnerable? What is good and what is bad we know, but sometimes we get confused about certain matters. What should we do in those matters when we get confused? And most importantly, why death? And what is going to happen beyond death? We are, no matter how much progress we make, we are always going to be dependent on a higher source to get answers to these questions for which we have no answers. So, if the West has been able to exercise its liberty to make certain achievements in certain areas of human interest, well, this is because the Almighty gave them the potential, but then obviously the Almighty also gave them in their design inbuilt a nature which was in need of a higher authority to give message, the divine revelation, which is what Islam is, which is what we're talking about.
I see. Right. My wife, she just is asking me about, is there any difference of touching the Quran while she's is reciting to see on a mobile and touching as a printed Quran? Is there any difference?
Now, incidentally, I talked about ijtihad in my earlier presentation. This obviously is going to be another ijtihad on it. My own very ordinary understanding is that it's not quite as much whether something is written on a page or is appearing on the mobile screen. It's the verses, and the respect and reverence attached to them, which is important. So I think there is no difference whatsoever. If there is something that you are in the routine habit of dealing with Quranic verses that are mentioned on the pages of the copies of the Quranic text, well, the same treatment should be given to the verses when they appear on the screen of your smartphone.
I see. Jazakallah. Then a very last question from my side, and after, if someone has a question, they can feel free to ask from Dr. Khalid Zaheer. The last question is very brief. If you can tell me, it's not relevant with the topic which we have, but because I'm living in the society where this issue is very much for the Muslim, the believers, and that is for the gays. I come across many customers who have a tendency or behavior like not a normal. I mean, they are gay. They attract towards more men, and they are judged by very easily. The same thing I have from some few old friends who and they are Muslim, but they have also this tendency, and they say they have this inclination from the birth, and after a few years they found themselves as a gay, and they are pathetic now because everyone hates them, and they consult me what they should do. So my question as a educated and beloved person in the eyes of God, how we should treat the gays in socially, or how we should handle them?
It's a very long debate that needs to be conducted on it, but very briefly, given the time constraints that we have, number one, no matter who the individual is, when you are dealing with the person, you've got to be polite, you've got to be respectful, you've got to be considerate. We're not allowed to hate people because of who they are, what kind of inclinations they have. If somebody is doing something clearly wrong right in front of my eyes, if I will have an influence of him on him, I'll try to politely correct him. But if he does something wrong outside my view somewhere else, and has come to my shop or to my office, to my home, well, I'm going to treat him with respect. Why? Because he is a human being. Also because I should have inside me this yearning that I should be able to tell him, influence him by the understanding that I have about the truth. Coming to the question of gays and lesbians, well, leave aside as to whether it's natural or not. In Islam, we are not allowed to have any physical sexual relationship with anyone, man or woman, outside the bonds of marriage. Extramarital sex, whether between a man or a woman, or between a man or a man, or between a woman or a woman, is not allowed. If somebody has strong inclination towards others, it could be possible that a married man can claim that the way I have been designed, the way my nature is, I feel inclined towards other women so strongly that I cannot resist. I will not allow this to happen. What does it mean? What it means is that I'll stop that man from doing it. If somebody is doing something evil beyond the public gaze, a couple, man or woman, man or man, a woman or a woman, are having illegitimate relationship in a certain room and nobody can see them, well, we can't do anything about it. If I learn about it, and somebody that, one of them is close to me, I will try to help that person understand that it's wrong. The trouble with this movement of gayism and lesbianism is that they want it to be recognized, acknowledged, legitimized in the public. Now, this is where we disagree with them. As far as their leaning is concerned, well, we will sympathize with them. We'll tell them that what is evil is evil. Even if I have a very strong yearning to steal belongings of others, it's still a crime. It's still bad. God Almighty, hopefully, is going to be more considerate in dealing with the matter, but I can't call what is wrong as right. However, while as in response to your question, if it comes to the question of treating them, we'll treat them equally. But we will not support them in their cause, wherein they want something we think is wrong to be declared as right. That's something which obviously is what we will not be comfortable with.
Right, Jazakallah. Any brother or sister here, they can ask the question, and otherwise we will close this session, inshallah, in 1 or 2 minutes. And next Saturday, inshallah, the same time, 9 o'clock, Dr. Mir Ahmad will be conducting a session in Urdu, and we are reading and understanding the Surah Al-Mulk. So, inshallah, next Saturday, the same channel on Go2Meeting, same ID, we will be coming here. And I request on behalf of AM UK, Al-Mu'arij UK, that you spread the message to your friends, family, colleagues, business associates who are curious to learn Islam, about Quran. So this is the best opportunity in the West where we are living, where we have very limited opportunities to learn, to engage with Islamic things. So, and this is the best option that 1 hour in a week, if you can dedicate yourself, your wife, your sister, your brother, your friends, your relatives, cousins, anyone, towards these sessions which are conducting on weekly basis, Saturday and Sunday, that will be really, really good. Not for our chapter development in UK, but also for the Muslim living in UK, because we are blessed with great scholars from the Al-Mawri, like Dr. Khalid Zaheer. We can get benefit of their experience and understanding of their Islamic theology, explanation, tafsir, and a lot of things. So it's a very deeply request from me. So if you have no question, then we will conclude the session today. So inshallah, we will meet next Saturday, 9 o'clock morning, according to British Standard Time, and with Dr. Khalid, Munir Ahmad. Once again, Josefa has a question. Yes, Josefa, please.
Alaikum, Dr. Just a question. It's not related to our topic today. I was just listening to one of the very famous psychologists. He's in Canada. I do respect him a lot. We were talking, one of his speeches, I was listening to him. He said that Islam is a religion which has been spread through the sword, which is of course a very common allegation of Islam. He said that Prophet ﷺ was a warlord. That's why he has managed to diminish all the big kingdoms of that time. And his question, his allegation, I can understand here, is what he says, that he punished people of that time, which of course what we have understood so far, that the Allah always, when he does is Istamam Hujjat, then of course he punished people. Most of the cases in the past, they've been punished directly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in his Prophet ﷺ's case, he was commanded to go and kill them. Is there anything related to the last message, the message being completed, or why Allah has asked Prophet ﷺ go and kill them if they're non-believers?
What we understand is that when God's messengers, Rasul, they come to this world, at the culmination of their mission, when people who believe, the righteous people, they are clearly distinguished from those who reject, the evildoers. This happens only in the case of messengers, and it happens only at the ending period, the culmination of their prophetic mission, because truth is presented so very clearly, not only through the good conduct of the prophet, the messenger, not only through the effective message that is delivered, but also because of the circumstances that the Almighty creates for the immediate addressees of the messengers, that the fact that the message is from God becomes absolutely clear. There is no doubt about it. Now, when that happens, it is the Almighty's law that He punishes the wrongdoers, those who reject the messenger, despite knowing it to be true and from God, through punishments. The punishments are primarily of two kinds. It's either through natural calamities, or it is through the swords of the companions. It's the latter case, the swords of the companions, if the companions are large in number. It's not just the case of the last messenger, but also in the case of Musa alayhi salam as well, that the Quran tells us, and the Bible also confirms it, that when they started worshipping a calf, and the Almighty punished them by requiring some of the followers to kill others for having committed the crime of shirk, polytheism. So these are two different possibilities. If the number of people following the messenger the number is small, like we know from Bible, for instance, that in the case of Lut alayhi salam, Lot, it was not even in double figures. So in that case, the swords are not used. But in the other case, when the number is larger, then it is the military might which is used for the same purpose. I agree with you that we find it somewhat difficult to let the non-Muslims know that it was only a punishment from God. It was era-specific. It cannot be generalized. We find it difficult because not many Muslims are convinced. And we find it also difficult because some Muslims have actually chosen to continue with the process of killing people in the name of God, and mentioning these verses in support of their actions. I think it's our duty to let people continue to know what the truth is, and to let them know that the Almighty punishes in the ways He deems fit, whether it's natural calamity or whether it's the swords of the companions. It is divine punishment. The general principle law is that you simply cannot kill anyone. If you kill an individual, it is as if you've killed the entire mankind.
Jazakallah khair. Here we will conclude our whole session, and we are very thankful to our speaker, Dr. Khalid Zaheer, who gave us his very valuable time and help us to understand our Deen Islam. So inshallah, next Saturday we will meet on the same Go2Meeting channel, and Jazakallah khair to attendees and participants.
I've got a very quick question regarding the questions that we discussed today. So Dr. Saab, when we look at the food chain, the animals, we know that they have feelings. They sort of form tribes, they kill each other, they shed blood. And given the intelligence of man, obviously it's greater, so we are able to overcome everything and sort of conquer the areas and control everything else. But what is the fact that is highlighted here? Is it using your morality to overcome the basic nature that you have to sort of conquer and and I guess shed blood in terms of whether it's other animals within the food chain or another tribe or another nation.
Unfortunately, there was a lot of disturbance in the question that I was trying to understand from you. But you know, if I've got it correctly, probably what you're asking is that why is it that we have been allowed to consume the meat of animals when we know that animals have feelings, and when we kill them, you know, we are killing another existence. So what's the point? Why? Is that roughly what you asked?
Sorry, is my voice any clear now?
Sorry, Umar, I think your voice is very disturbing and distorting. We can't hear you very clearly. Very sorry about that.
That's fine. I'll pick this up next time.
All right,
Okay.
inshallah.
Or you can write, if it's a very quick question, you can chat it and I can loud for you. I can speak also. If it's
I'll pick this up next time. It's all right.
Right.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khair for all attendees. Thank you so much for coming, and inshallah see you next Saturday. Assalamu alaikum.
Now, let me continue with answering some of the questions that I have here on the Facebook.
Okay.
You know that this session is primarily for those who are in UK, Al-Morid UK, but then I also avail the opportunity of including you people on the Facebook, and it's very kind of you that you also join in. So very briefly, I'm going to answer some of your questions. Please suggest me a good and easy tafsir. Now, if you are asking for a tafsir in Urdu, don't ask for, if you're asking for an easy tafsir, then I think the translation and the notes by Dr. Farooq Khan, Muhammad Farooq Khan, who was martyred some 7 years ago, that probably is the easiest and the best. But the detailed tafsir of Maulana Islahi, Tadabbur Quran, and the brief annotated notes of Ramdi Saab Al-Bayan with its translation is what I find the most useful. The question is it desirable to donate one's body organs after death, in your opinion? I think it's a good idea. If somebody else could be helped after our death by them using our body parts, well, there's nothing wrong in it. In fact, it's a good idea. Is donating one's organs permitted in Islam? I personally think it is a very noble act, but I've heard people say a body should not be desecrated. Well, those who say that, they have their own point of view, but I think if you are enabling somebody to be helped even after your death by leaving it in your will that your body part is going to be used by somebody else, I think God wants us to sacrifice for others. So making a sacrifice is something desirable and is a noble cause, and I believe that there is nothing wrong in it. Thank you very much for your attention. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.